A few things about what got me to the topic that we're talking about. It is slightly strange. I'm, by background, a comparative lawyer, not an international professor of international. I really am a professor of international law at the Metropolitan University, but that is slightly fraudulent because my background is really not in public international law, but in comparative law. But I've worked in the 1970s and 80s for Amnesty International. I was working in the research department, and my particular interest became, as a result of that work, the application of international human rights standards at the national level. Now, most of the work I therefore have done in the field of human rights is in what you might call traditional human rights. Fight against torture, the death penalty, extrajudicial killings, unfair trials, especially things relating to the criminal justice system. So you wonder, why did I and how did I get into data protection? And that is slightly odd. In the 1980s, Amnesty in London started finding difficulties with data protection legislation. And there weren't that many people that knew about data protection legislation, and I, as a comparative lawyer, was asked to advise them. So that's how I got into it, and then from one thing came the other, and then started advising the direct marketing industry, of all people, on the new directive that went through the EC at the time. And then as things happen, you become, quote unquote, an expert on data protection, European data protection law. So for quite a long time, I sort of walked lame on 2 feet, as I think they say in the Bible. I sort of did my proper human rights work in places like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, as you just said, not just and I did data protection stuff, and the two really had very little to do with each other. Until fairly recently, when data protection and police matters started cropping up. And so it's only in the last maybe 5, 6, 8 years that I've drawn these two old strands together, and they come together in a very interesting sort of way. I'm now working a lot with an organisation I'll tell you a little bit about later on, called the Foundation for Information Policy Research. I'm sitting on their advisory council, FIPR, very easy website, www.fipr.org. And that is a club of geeks. You know the word? I don't know, yeah, all the word computer geeks, right? Mostly Cambridge University specialists, including the leading chaps on data security. And they look at policy problems in the information field. And one of the things that they look at is the difficulty that policymakers have in understanding information technology, and especially the problems of information technology. And I'm, again, a slightly strange person in their field, because I'm a lawyer, I'm not a computer specialist, I know very little about technology. But I sort of bring in that sort of legal aspect into looking at these fields. So these things tend to come together. What I'm going to talk about today is a series of trends in Europe that, in their combination, I feel are quite frightening and are a serious threat to the rule of law in Europe. And it's one of these slowly creeping threats, not one of these things that happens overnight when a dictatorship suddenly coming around, but things that slowly creep in, and there are a lot of policy aspects that I'll come to. So in a way, I feel slightly disloyal, speaking at the 50th celebration, as Rob said, of the founding of the EU and the 15th anniversary of the Maastricht Treaty. Because I feel like I'm a good European. I like to see more European integration, unlike most people in the country I come from. Live in anyway, which is the United Kingdom, where people are extremely awkward about European integration. I would like more European integration. As far as I'm concerned, the European state will come tomorrow, but there would have to be a state or a federation based on the rule of law and respect for human rights. And they always proclaim that. And it's always high up in the principles that they specify. But I'm going to tell you today about some trends in Europe, in particular in the European Union, that I think contradict those principles. So I'm not doing that in a way with the aim to undermine Europe, in order to strengthen it. So, let me start. That's me, on the top there. And let me go to the next picture. And as I said, I'm drawing on a number of things I've been doing, and I'm drawing them together. Earlier this summer, in August, I gave a talk at what was called the Summer Academy of Data Protection in Germany, Sommerakademie for Datenschutz. And I talked about the development of the Big Brother state, the surveillance state in the United Kingdom in particular. And in a way, it was rather an easy audience, because the Germans are quite aware of data protection, they have very good data protection, they have very good data protection authorities. So telling them how ghastly things were in the United Kingdom was rather welcome, because they could all sit there and say, I'll do a lot better. But I'll tell you a little bit about how some of these things happen in the rest of Europe, and how the trend is to become pan-European in that respect as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, mostly because I have some nice pictures, is I'm going to quickly go through these nice pictures, which everybody liked in Kiel, so I'm sure you'll probably like them as well. We all know, I would like to say, the British Bobby. There's the old British Bobby. Nice chap with a little moustache, looking after little children in many ways. But Britain, England just progressed. This is what he looks like today. The old unarmed Bobby is not entirely as friendly and as cozy as the chap with his helmet, and I'll talk about the helmet in a minute as well. You have, in the United Kingdom, CCTV cameras. You know, CCTV is closed circuit television cameras. The United Kingdom is the most advanced country in the world when it comes to television cameras. It has 20% of all cameras in the world. There you are, 21 million cameras. 4.2 of them are in the United Kingdom. 14 people for every camera. 300 times a day a person is caught on television. I think that's particularly true in London. When I walk from King's Cross Station and I go into the underground and I get out of the underground again and I get to the university, I literally am followed every step of the way. This is the kind of surveillance that you are aware of. And there are major developments in this kind of surveillance. This is much more than some cameras and a room somewhere where a chap sits with 50 cameras to look at. And I'll show you that in a minute. The cameras are beginning to talk. I don't know if you've heard here about this thing. They're doing this in some cities in the United Kingdom. If you walk around as being a bit drunk, you throw your can of beer out onto the road, then a sound will go, "Hey, you there! Pick that up!" So that's what you can say. In fact, he's very polite and could you please pick up that BK rubber? Hey, you two, go to a hotel, I can get nice like as a rude comment. Okay? This is happening already. The camera that follows you and the camera that will speak to you. Goes a little bit further than that. There's a little camera in that helmet. That's a policeman's helmet. And it's got a little camera in it. And behind it is a little Wi-Fi thing, Bluetooth thing. And then either in his pocket or in the nearest police car, everything that he sees is being recorded. I had another one of a chap on a bicycle. I'm not sure whether that's exactly here. But this is the way in which this is developing. Goes again a little bit further. That's the little drone, as they call them. These things are already used. My son went to a pop concert the other day, and they had these drones flying over to see if you weren't smoking pot, right? You there, right? And they've now said this is going to be widely used for the Olympics. So if in 2012 you want to come to London, you'll be pleased to be photographed and go to a database. And I'll come to the database in a minute. First of all, this one, DNA. This is actually my beginning of the database state. All the things I showed you until now, cameras and speaking cameras and drones, are direct surveillance. People actually watching what you're doing. By and large, you can be reasonably aware of this. You're aware of the fact there is a camera. They may, of course, plant a bug in your room. If you watch and follow criminal trials closely, you'll be very surprised at the kind of invasive technology that is now around. where they put a little camera in the room of somebody and keep them under observation for a very, very long time. One of the big discussion points at the Summer Academy in Kiel was the proposal by the German government to introduce a law that will allow the government to install what they call online search of your PC. Online untersuchung. In fact, it's more than that. That is planting a Trojan horse, who's a geek here, the Trojan horse bit of spyware on your computer so that it logs your keys. It will follow everything you do. It will get all your passwords to any bank account you may have or other things that you have password protected. It can even remotely turn on the microphone and the camera in your PC without you being aware of it, thereby spying in your own room. It's highly intrusive, very difficult to square with the law in Germany, but I'll not get into that right now. All we're talking about is how highly developed direct surveillance is becoming. And don't think it isn't used. Don't think it's only used against terrorists. And I'll come back to what is a terrorist and what is a suspected terrorist a bit later. It is used, although the police and prosecuting authorities try to play this down. They try and not let too much of it come out in criminal trials. If at all possible, they try and get the evidence, then they secure through the secret surveillance, the real evidence, if you like, and they don't produce the preliminary investigation at the trial because they don't want to give away too much of their surveillance methods. They're extremely intrusive. Yeah, you can be spied upon extremely carefully. There was a proposal, I'll come back to in the European Union, to monitor database searches, for instance. You type in Al-Qaeda bomb and a few other things will immediately be highlighted. That is all direct surveillance. There is another form of surveillance which in a way, and of course not going to be linked in reality, and that is a new word, dataveillance. Now, I'll come back to this particular one in a minute, but I'll go back to the next, just to so you get the word dataveillance. The only reason I put her on because she's well prettier to look at than just the word dataveillance. Getting a picture of a computer is not nearly as exciting as getting a picture of a Bobby's helmet with a camera in it. But that is the more insidious way of surveillance. That is the keeping track of all the trails that you leave behind every time you use something electronic. Every time, most of you will be vaguely aware of this, but it's the realization of how far it goes when it gets interconnected that I'm hoping to bring home to you today. Every time you use a credit or a debit card, a bank card, that leaves a trail behind, right? Every time you log on and maybe file your taxes online, as you can now do at the UK, or pay your telephone bill, yeah, for that matter, the fact that you have a telephone record, all those things are kept in databases, pretty massive databases these days. Some of them are private companies. Every time you go to the supermarket, you probably have a loyalty card, yeah, all the time loyalty card or whatever. It'll tell you what you eat, what you drink, what kind of toilet paper you use, probably what kind of magazine you buy, all that kind of stuff. Amazingly detailed picture of your life. In London, if you want to travel around and you live in London, you will buy an Oyster card, an Oyster card. And you use that to get in and out of the underground and you get considerable reduction, so everybody has one. It keeps a track of every journey you make. Okay? Massive amount of data on it. If you've got a mobile phone, of course you all have a mobile phone. Mine is switched off for now. But if it's not switched off, there'll be a record of wherever the phone is, which is mostly where you are. Yeah? To within a few meters in a city like Maastricht. Very, very close. By the way, another little intrusion trick. The police can switch, you can use a little bit of spyware to switch somebody's microphone on while he's not aware of it. There was one particular drug dealer in the United Kingdom, it was rather a famous case. And they got his mobile phone, and they were aware of the fact that whatever he did, he always had his mobile phone with him. So when he spoke to anybody, even if it was he always had his mobile phone there.